Hi, my name is Autif Kamal. This is another episode of Be Logical. For this episode, I'm going to talk about Florida and how it is suffering an invasion of giant snails. Actually, they're called giant African land snails. Now, how did a giant African land snail get to Florida? I don't know for sure, but my guess is that someone either intentionally or unintentionally brought back a giant land snail from Africa, and so that enabled it to reproduce in Florida. And I'm getting this story from Barbara Liston, who wrote the article "Florida Battles Slimy Invasion by Giant Snails," and she wrote that for Reuters. Okay, so a giant African land snail is big enough that you have to hold it in your palm. I don't know if you've seen the smaller snails or even just snails in California, but those smaller snails, you can just pick them up with your index finger and your thumb. These, you can only carry them in your palm. You can't just use your finger, your index finger, and your thumb to carry the whole thing. Florida has been catching 1,000 of these giant African land snails per week, and since September 2011, they have caught 117,000 of them, and they lay typically 1,200 eggs per year. Okay, now what's wrong with having all of these land snails, these giant African land snails in Florida? Well, they eat plants, stucco, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and plaster. So they have a major problem on their hand in terms of their crops, because even if Florida has, for example, like lettuce, then the land snails will eat that. And so that's a major loss to their crops. As for stucco and plaster, a lot of walls for homes contain stucco and plaster, which means that the giant African land snails could feed on the walls of people's homes, and then leave a slimy trail on their walls in the process. So that is the danger or the annoyance to having all of these giant African land snails. And also something really interesting is that they have extremely strong shells. If you were to drive a car over the shell of one of these land snails, it would blow out your tire. That's how strong their shells are. Now, just to give you an idea of how Florida had dealt with this in the past, I'll tell you a story that Barbara Liston gives in her article. So in 1966, this boy goes on vacation in Hawaii and returns to Florida with 3 snails, and over the course of 7 years, because his grandmother had thrown those 3 snails into her backyard, that population grew to 17,000 snails in 7 years. And Florida spent $1 million and 10 years to eradicate them. Now, let's try to transfer that information to this current invasion. There's exactly 100,000 more of the giant African land snails and counting. So if you were to just times the amount spent by 10, you get 10 million, and times the number of years by 10, you get 100 years. Now, they're probably not going to wait 100 years because the population will probably still grow as they try to get rid of those giant African land snails. So my guess is that they will spend much more than $10 million, not only to get rid of them faster, but because these snails are a lot bigger, so I imagine it'll just take more to get rid of them. So my guess is that whatever they do to get rid of these snails, unless their snail displacement or eradication methods have improved greatly, they will spend a lot more than $10 million to get rid of these snails. Now here are some possible methods that they could use, but these are more for if you have a snail invasion in your backyard. I'm not sure if that would change if you have a larger scale of snails that you want to remove. But 3 possible methods that you could use if you just had snails in your backyard, and which they could possibly use for these giant land snails, would be to spray pesticides, pick them up one by one, or use what is called a beer trap. I got the beer trap idea from Dermot Quigley, who wrote an article for eHow. The name of the article is How to Kill Snails with Beer, and I got the other 2 ideas from the username Plasmana, who wrote the article How to Get Rid of Snails and Slugs on the website Instructables. Now, there are some pros and cons to each of these. If Florida were to spray pesticides, it would cover a wide area, but the thing is, a lot of these snails will be on plants, which means those plants will be rendered unusable. If crops were sprayed, then that means that those crops cannot be eaten now. They're useless, because you don't want humans to consume pesticides, because I imagine that's probably poisonous. Now, you can pick them up one by one, but that'll take a lot longer. However, it's more humane. If you don't feel good about eradicating, killing snails, then this would be the more humane thing to do, which is to pick them up one by one and basically quarantine them. Keep them in an isolated area, and then just transfer them to an environment that's suitable for them but does not inconvenience humans at the same time. And lastly, you have the beer trap, which has the benefit of bringing all the snails to you and then killing them as they come to the beer. Now, the reason why they would come to the beer is because beer has yeast in it, and the yeast attracts the snails, and at the same time the alcohol kills them. Okay? And basically how you'd arrange it is that you would dig holes around the plants that you want to save, and you'd pour beer into those holes, and so as they come for the plants, they fall in the holes with the beer in them because they're attracted to the yeast in the beer, and then you kill the giant land snails on a massive scale. Okay, and those are some potential methods that Florida could use to get rid of these snails. And that's it for this episode of Be Logical. Thank you.